Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much for having me. It is an honor. USENIX holds a very high reputation in Germany, as you can see by the many German participants as well. As you can see, this has been an international collaboration, and I'm very thankful to my co-authors, without whom this would not have been possible. All right, content moderation in the InterPlanetary File System. So what we set out to answer with this work is basically, if you have a peer-to-peer system, in this case one with easy access from the outside via an HTTP translation layer, what could a content moderation system look like? And we do this by measuring an existing system, a solution for the InterPlanetary File System, which is a peer-to-peer system. So we measure this and we characterize what works well and what doesn't work well. In IPFS, there is a centralized list. It's called the bad bits list, which holds about 400,000 entries of data items that are problematic. This list is maintained by Protocol Labs, the developers of IPFS. The majority of the list contains of DMCA-related entries, so copyright material. But there's also phishing and malware and other things. We find that the reaction time of new items appearing in the network and then later appearing in the list varies and can be quite slow. Also, we find that the implementation of the list in this distributed setting is, of course, a little difficult. To understand the results, I will first talk about IPFS for like 2 minutes maybe. IPFS has a DHT, it's a Kademlia DHT that stores mappings from provider or from content identifiers to a list of providers providing that content. So if you have content, you add it to your node and the node then adds it to the DHT. If you want to download content, in this case via a browser or any HTTP client, you can talk to an HTTP gateway running on a node. The node will then search the DHT and search its local neighborhood using a protocol called bitswap to find the provider for the content. It then contacts the provider in a peer-to-peer fashion, downloads the content from them, and returns it to you via HTTP. The whole HTTP stuff at the bottom is optional, but it is very convenient because people usually, not everyone can run one of these peer-to-peer nodes, but using those gateways, you can access content on IPFS, and it usually looks like this. You have a provider on some domain name, let's say IPFS.io. These are operated by Protocol Labs. And then /IPFS/whatever. That's a content identifier, a CID. It's a long string. And it identifies the content by its content. It's a hash, basically. There are also so-called gateway as a service providers where you can rent your own gateway, which is usually used for Web3 projects, for example, games. You get a subdomain. It looks quite nice, and then you can serve your IPFS-hosted content using HTTP. However, these gateway as a service providers, they don't really vet what kind of subdomains you can get, so it's definitely very possible to get benign-looking URLs, which then ultimately can be used, for example, to serve phishing content hosted on IPFS. What are the problems or challenges regarding content moderation in a system like this? So there is no central registry for CIDs, because it's a peer-to-peer system, everyone can do what they want, people just add new content. These public gateways make it very easy to disseminate the content because you can just send a link. Everyone can click on the link, you don't need to install any software. And it's difficult to determine where the content actually came from. It comes to you via the gateway, but who actually hosts it is unknown. You can also generate multiple URLs pointing to the same content because the data is content addressed, so you can generate multiple links. Okay, that's it for the introduction. Now let's get into the results. Oh, well, yeah. Actually, there is URL filtering dealing with this. For example, Google Safe Browsing. They have block lists for URLs, but it doesn't really work because you can generate new URLs, etc., etc. All right, so the developers of IPFS saw this, and as a solution, they created this so-called bad bits list in 2021. By now, it contains about 400,000 entries, and it is based on email reports sent to Protocol Labs. So someone sends a takedown notice, they review it, and if it's found to be legit, they take the CIDs from the email, they normalize them because there's different encodings, and they hash them, put them on the list, and that's it. The list is public, you can download it, and in recent versions of the software, there's support to check against the list. So any request coming in, the CID is taken, hashed, well, normalized, hashed, checked against the list, and if it's on the list, then the request is denied. So Let's look at the evolution of the list first and foremost. It was created in 2021, and we see some growth in 2021 and 2022. However, most growth, quite explosively, happened in 2023, also in large batches. When seeing this, and seeing that there's a list of 400,000 entries, the question we had was, well, what's on the list? So we found out. The majority of the list, as I said earlier, is related to DMCA. So most of it is copyrighted material. We characterize here by 2 dimensions. The color codes we call it thread type, so the type of content in general. DMCA is copyrighted content, then there's also phishing. Other and unknown is stuff that we couldn't download and couldn't characterize. And we also characterize by file type. We can see that the DMCA content is mostly PDFs because they are research papers mostly. And phishing is HTML, unsurprisingly. Next, having this list and having the evolution of the list, we set out to find out how quickly new content makes it onto the list. We do this by examining request logs from the past, and comparing when we first see an item in the network to when it appears on the list, if it is on the list now. And we can see, let's start at the bottom with the yellow line, that is the evolution of the list in general, so the time between seeing a new item on the network and when it is on the list. We can see that the reaction time is quite slow. This is, of course, because this is a passive list, so you first need to actively send an email, which then triggers the inclusion of the data into the list. And that's the red line on the very far left. That is the time between email reception at Protocol Labs and when the item is on the list. We can see that after they receive the email, Protocol Labs reacts quite quickly, but of course the email needs to be sent first. The line in the middle are what we call anti-phishing services. These are, let's say, OpenFish or PhishTank or Google Safe Browsing. They get their data somehow, I don't know how, but they react quite quickly in general, which is nice. Next, I hinted at that we have these request logs, and what we did next was look at, in the past, how often these items were requested. So this looks at unique peer ID, CID combinations per month for items that are now on the deny list. We can see that copyrighted material is popular all the time in general, but since about 2023, we see that much more phishing has been going on. And this seems to continue this trend. The big line that's also indicated there is the requests we see overall. You can see that it somewhat follows the trend, but there seems to be more phishing going on than requests overall. In general, it's not that much. So we see that less than 1% of the requests we see overall are for blocked content, but it's definitely happening. Finally, the figure is a bit overwhelming, I know, but this is how the public gateway providers implement the list. And we characterize this by who operates the gateway and which list we're talking about. You can see a few things. At the very top are the gateway as a service providers. And you might see that they don't care a whole lot about any of the lists. So the Web 2 list is the anti-phishing services, and the other list is, of course, the bad bits list. You can see in the middle, there's the gateway operated by Protocol Labs, and unsurprisingly, they adhere to their own bad bits list, which is good. But in general, the support varies quite a lot because these gateway providers, well, first of all, they need to implement it. They need to run the correct software, run the latest versions, and then subscribe to the list, etc., etc. They need to update the list as well. So it's quite varied. All right, so we have some more stuff in the paper, but for now, general recommendations, things that we found and future work that would be nice looking into. It would be nice to have a decentralized moderation solution, because right now the bad bits list, it is centrally maintained, and even though Protocol Labs is doing a good job, it would be nice to have it decentralized in the spirit of a decentralized network. There are no annotations in the list, which is a bit problematic because the DMCA, let's say there's a gateway operator who doesn't care a whole lot about the DMCA because maybe it's not applicable in their jurisdiction. It would be very sad, it would be a shame really, if they decided to not implement the entire list just because they don't care about copyright stuff. because the list, as I mentioned, also contains malware and other things which should probably be blocked. We want to improve Web 2 filtering capabilities by making it understand content identifiers, etc. And we want to improve Web 3 filtering lists by having it talk to Web 2 lists. So basically, if you have these anti-phishing providers, it would be easy to just feed that data into the Web 3 list. In conclusion, we measured an existing solution of content moderation for IPFS, which is a peer-to-peer data storage and retrieval network. There is a centralized list maintained by Protocol Labs based on email reports. The list is not annotated, but we find that the majority of the content is DMCA related. The usage of the list in clients is optional. You need the latest version and you need to subscribe to it, etc. So we find that most clients don't actually implement it, which leads to the content still being very much available from the peer-to-peer network. So if you actually run a client, you can download the content from the network. Public gateways, they are HTTP entry points to the network. Some of them implement the list, some of them don't. It varies. But if they do implement it, it's effective at blocking access to a probably wide audience because of the easy access via HTTP. Thank you.